Assalamu alaikum. We are continuing from verse number 260, inshallah. Tonight we're looking at the verse of infaq, spending in the path of Allah. Over to you, Ustadh Sadeq.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذ قال إبراهيم رب أرني كيف تحيي الموتى قال أولم تؤمن قال بلى ولكن ليطمئن قلبي قال فخذ أربعة من الطير فصرهن إليك ثم اجعل على كل جبل منهن جزءا ثم ادعهن يأتينك سعيا واعلم أن الله عزيز حكيم مثل الذين ينفقون أموالهم في سبيل الله كمثل حبة أنبتت 7 سنابل في كل سنبلة 100 حبة والله يضاعف لمن يشاء والله واسع عليم الذين ينفقون أموالهم في سبيل الله ثم لا يتبعون ما أنفقوا منا ولا أذى لهم أجرهم عند ربهم ولا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون قول معروف ومغفرة خير من صدقة يتبعها أذى والله غني حليم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تبطلوا صدقاتكم بالمن والأذى كالذي ينفق ماله رئاء الناس ولا يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فمثله كمثل صفوان عليه تراب فأصابه وابل فتركه صلدا لا يقدرون على شيء مما كسبوا والله لا يهدي القوم الكافرين صدق الله العظيم.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And when Abraham said, "My Lord, show me how you give life to the dead," he said, "Do you not yet believe?" "I do," said Abraham, "but just for my heart to be at rest." So God said, "Take 4 birds and make them familiar with you. Then place them on separate hilltops, call them back, and they will come to you at speed. Know that God is all-powerful and wise." So I'll pause here for a moment just to say something about the translation. This translation leans towards a certain view which we will discuss, inshallah, which is not the majority view of the Mufassirin. But in this minority view, there is no killing or chopping of the birds, and therefore it's not about an act of resurrection of the birds. But in many translations, you will find some brackets that insert that these birds have been chopped and killed. So inshallah, we'll come back to that and why there are differences and how that corresponds to the words of the ayah, inshallah. The parable for those who spend their wealth in God's cause is of grains of corn that produce 7 ears, each bearing 100 grains. God gives multiple increase to whomever he wishes. He is limitless and all-knowing. Those who spend their wealth in God's cause and do not follow their spending with reminders of their benevolence or hurtful words will have their reward with their Lord. There is no fear for them, nor will they grieve. A kind word and forgiveness is better than a charitable deed followed by hurtful words. God is self-sufficient, forbearing. You who believe, do not cancel out your charitable deeds with reminders and hurtful words, like those who spend their wealth only to be seen by people, not believing in God and the last day. Their case is like a rocky surface which has earth upon it, but then heavy rainfall leaves it completely bare. Such people get no rewards for their works. and God does not guide the disbelievers to success.
Maybe we can cover the Ustadh Ahmet, the traditional tafsirs, and then we'll leave the Ustadh Sohaib. He's done a deep dive on this verse. MashaAllah, I enjoyed reading your article, Ustadh Sohaib. Well, at least the section on this one. I didn't read the section on the qisas part. But very well written, very well researched. And I listened.
So we'll get into sort of. So I've written a paper on this in which I tried to give the best presentation of each side of the debate, right? And I think that's an approach that we should encourage, not to have ta'assub for any view. And if people even after this discussion feel that the safety is with the majority and the safety is with the bulk of the mufassirin, and that's absolutely fine. For me personally, I became more and more convinced when investigating this ayah and the tafasir that there is more merit, in my view, in the minority view. That being said,
and the majority view first, and then you give us your
inshallah. So I'll share with you the sort of a side-by-side table just to kind of see. I'll do that inshallah after you've explained the contours of the of the common opinion. But you see, like if in certain contexts, what I was trying to say is that you might come at it and say, let me point out all the problems with one view and all the merits of the other view. Whereas what we should do is try to be fair and balanced.
Yeah. And
you might find that, okay, you might prefer one of the views, but you still find something good in the other perspective, which enhances, or nuances the view that you happen to take. So Tafadhal, why don't you tell us how this is explained by the Mufassirin and those that we're looking at, including, by the way, Ibn Ashur. To my disappointment, Ibn Ashur is with the standard view, and in fact doesn't even mention the other view. But Imam al-Razi certainly does. So I'll tell you how Imam al-Razi presents it, inshallah.
Well, Ibn Kathir covers, I think you've mentioned, Ustadh Saeed, as to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Ibrahim alayhi salam to have 4 birds, chop them into parts, keep the heads with them. Tafsir even mentions that as well, and then distribute them to different mountaintops, and finally call them. And when they come to him, they would only accept whichever bird it is, the head that the body matches the head. And so Ibrahim alayhi salam sees the flesh, the feathers and skin, and all that coming together before his eyes. But the reason Ibn Kathir mentions that Ibrahim alayhi salam asks for this is because after he tells Nimrod that my Lord is he who gives life and causes death, so he actually wants to see it. We talked about the different levels of yaqeen last week, but he wants to see it haqq al-yaqeen, like he wants to have that certainty of feeling. And we are more liable to be in doubt than Ibrahim when he says this verse. The Prophet says, and as in to seek certainty of faith. This is the resurrection. After all, is a matter of the unseen. And Ibn Abbas also says that there's no ayah more that gives more hope to me than any other ayah in the Quran.
Than this one, yeah. I guess there's no explanation, but my understanding is that if Ibrahim alayhi salam asks for it, then the doubts that we might harbor at some point, let's say, that this gives us hope that we keep seeking certainty, inshallah. So those are the few things that Ibn Kathir mentions. Yeah, Imam Baqai, just to mention, like again with the first story that was mentioned, the story of the Nimrod, the person that totally denied the hereafter or claimed to have a part in it. And then Ibrahim gives him that rational argument. And then the second one was the muta'ajjib. And he was curious when he sees a city or a valley destroyed. And he goes, how is God going to give life? And no, because when he says that, he's a bit, the first one we should definitely not be in. Imam Baqai says the second one we should try to get out of that level. And the third one is
sort of, like you said, yaqeen, or even higher, tuma'nina. And he says that Imam Harali said Ibrahim saw a miracle type showing of the reality of the hereafter, something that he had a right to actually seek. It was almost like he was at that level, because Allah says we show him the hidden malakut of the heavens and the earth. And because he was at that level, it was in his right to ask for that level. On a personal note, I thought of it like as a very bad example. If you had that Aladdin, you rub the genie, you have 3 wishes. This was one of the wishes that Ibrahim alayhis salam had. He could have asked this, so he was entitled. The wording of the verse implies that most people, Imam Harali says, who seek to be shown such things are doing so due to weak faith, although this is an exception and Ibrahim alayhis salam is not. That's why Allah SWT, in a way, asked that question to clearly show that his was not the case, but because usually it's done out of a weakness of case. And Imam Harali goes on to make a point that even many of the people of weak faith, when they see the karamat of the awliya, that does more damage to them than any good. So he was just saying sometimes how signs are not always the best things. Imam Baqai says that Ibrahim alayhi salam was at that level of iman, like it was man futira ala nayli shay'in jubila ala shawqi lahu, he says, because he was capable of reaching such high levels of faith, iman, the shawq was given to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in a way. And it also says that he says in a beautiful way that, look, if these birds flock to Khalil alayhi salam, then imagine all creation flocking to Jalil subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says in a very poetic way. And lastly, he quotes the brother of Imam Ghazali's brother, Ahmed, I think his name is Ahmed al-Ghazali. He was asked from a Sufi perspective, which maqam is higher? Not the station, not the individuals, because it's comparing the maqam of Ibrahimi, which is to seek higher tuma'nina, or the maqam of Ali, who said if the curtains were to be lifted, my yaqeen will not increase. And Imam Ghazali's brother, he answers that the maqam of Ibrahim is higher because, and then he quotes the verse, وَجَحَدُوا بِهَا وَاسْتَيْقَنَتْهَا أَنفُسُهُم. They denied the signs, even their souls had yaqeen of it. So you can have yaqeen, but you can still be in a bad situation. To always seek higher and higher, that maqam of Ibrahimi is the higher position. From the wording of the verse, and Ustadh Sohaib will shed more light on this, so he also takes this perspective of fasurhunna, yani train them. Train them. And like Ustadh Sohaib said, I was surprised to see that actually, especially with the ilayk, fasurhunna ilayk, although it's both of the readings, but Imam Baqai says sort of train them so that you become familiar to them, really acquainted with them, so that the miracle becomes bigger. But he does go with the Jumhur opinion that there is this qatti'uhunna, cut them into pieces and mix them and put them into different mountain tops. The 4 mountains reflecting the 4 directions, so from wherever's closest by. So to come, and it's a real full miracle for Ibrahim alayhi salam to see that and witness that. And from one angle, just reading it in the Quran, it's like you've seen it. It's so certain.
Is it?
I mean,
that to me is the crux of the difference between the 2 opinions.
No, it was a bad time to say. When Allah says something in the Quran, like let's say Ashab al-Fil, you don't witness it, but when you hear that verse, Alam yarat tayran arsalna alayhim.
Talking about the incident.
Yeah, when the Quran describes the incident, because it's Allah describing it, He was there, He did it. It's like you've seen it to the extent where you can bear testimony that I swear this happened based on the testimony.
But okay.
Generally, not this specific.
We're getting into the jidal here a little bit, because in the beginning you said that Ibrahim alayhi salam knew this, but he wanted to see it. وَنَحْنُ أَوْلَى بِالشَّكِّ مِنْهُ, right? So now you're saying, but for us it's sufficient to have read it in the Quran, whereas Ibrahim alayhi salam in a way needed, on some level, to see it for this itminan al-qalb. And this to me is one of the core issues that I have with the way that this has typically been explained. And it hinges on a few aspects of the wording as well. Because in the beginning, what does Ibrahim alayhi salam ask? Arini كيف تحيي الموتى. So the thing is hinging on kayfiyya, or the way, yeah, how you give life to the dead. So, sorry, I seem to have skipped to the wrong page of translation now. We should be
260.
Yeah, here we are, right, 44. So, yes, and I think that this aspect, yeah, it is touched on in the standard tafsir, but I think, it's sort of not so clear how the kayfiyya is achieved. So, in short, let me just wrap up. What is Abu Muslim's view about? Abu Muslim, by the way, belonged to the Mu'tazila. So, obviously, and what's outside of the Ahl Sunnah. And he, was not also representative of the Mu'tazila in his view, because it turns out that any Mu'tazili mufassir that I've seen either disagrees with him or refutes him, or doesn't mention him at all. So Zamakhshari doesn't mention this alternative view at all, the most famous Mu'tazili mufassir. And then you find Al-Hakim al-Jishumi mentions Abu Muslim's view at length, but says that it can't be accepted. And the main problem he has with it is it goes against consensus. So if we're going to place weight on the issue of consensus in tafsir, then that will be a major problem for Abu Muslim's view. And then we have Al-Qadi Abdul Jabbar, also a major Mu'tazili mufassir. Although we don't have his tafsir, it seems to me that he has also criticized it, and that is probably what Imam al-Razi is quoting from when Imam al-Razi lays out Abu Muslim's view, and he explains how Abu Muslim is reading the words of the ayah, and then he says, but there are some issues which have been mentioned by the proponents of the standard view, and then he quotes a few things. And
we don't have Abu Muslim's own words, do we? We only have it from Fakhruddin.
we don't have his own text. So mostly when we encounter Abu Muslim now, we encounter him through al-Razi. And in fact, sometimes people have sort of made a mistake. By people I mean here, Rashid Rida in the early 20th century has endorsed and supported Abu Muslim's view, right? So I'm on team Rashid Rida here as well, okay? But the thing is, Rashid Rida then said, why did Imam al-Razi make these points against Abu Muslim and their weak points? But in fact, it wasn't al-Razi who made them, because al-Razi was quoting someone. He says, وَاحْتَجَّ الْقَائِلُونَ بِالْقَوْلِ الْمَشْهُورِ بِوُجُوهِ. Then he quotes some things which I assume is actually from Al-Qadi Abdul Jabbar, based on some circumstantial evidence of that. So the standard view, the main thing that defends it is to say, well, this is how it's, everyone's always seen it this way, and there are some reports, not like directly to the Prophet ﷺ, but the companions are telling us it was this bird, and he kept his head, and there's some sort of specifics which show that the early Muslims were reading it in that way as well, that in fact Ibrahim alayhi salam has chopped the birds. We see that there is no word for chopping here unless we take the word surhunna to mean qatti'hunna, which was one of the explanations that came and has some basis in language. But then there's a problem with the word ilaik. Cut them to yourself. It creates a problem. And what's usually understood is that, no, surhunna means bring them close to you. And, oddly, in the standard opinion, that's usually explained that so that you recognize them when they come back to you. But then, sur nafsaka ilayhinna, then you make yourself familiar with them or make them familiar with you. Which way around is it supposed to be? Al-Muhim, the important thing is, then you have to kind of infer that there's a cutting that takes place in order to place them on the hilltops for them to come back to you alive, right? Because if they come back to you alive, they have to be dead before that. So we have to infer that from the ayah, and that is the standard approach. So in fact, then placing them on separate hilltops, juz'an is used, right? So one may complain that in this other view, you're talking about placing the birds alive. So what does juz mean? Juz can mean one of the set, right? So one of them. So a juz from 4 birds is 1 bird, or indeed 2 birds or 3 birds. This is all of them. A juz from 4 birds. But in the standard view, what it means is that you kill them, you chop them up, you mix their remains together, and then you take some of this minced meat, and you place it on each of the mountains, maybe 4 mountains, or however you might understand it. So I didn't give you a synopsis of Abu Muslim's view. Basically, he's saying what's happening here is Allah Azza wa Jal is giving him a verbal and mental demonstration of this crucial part of kaifa, how Allah gives life to the dead. So when he says arini, show me, this, ru'ya can be with the eye and ru'ya can be with the mind, that is to see and understand. This is very common in the Qur'an. We can give examples if you like. So he says, for my heart to be at rest, I need some understanding of how this is possible or how this works. So Allah says, it's almost like saying, suppose you took 4 birds. So he could actually go ahead and do this instruction, but it's not necessary to read this as go ahead and actually do this. And of course, at the end of the ayah, there's no mention about what happened, and Ibrahim a.s. then actually enacted this, and then he felt that itminan al-qalb, which we can assume all of that. That's fine. But since it's not mentioned, we could also take it another way, that it was not necessary to actually do it. The verbal demonstration was enough. The mental demonstration is enough. So he says, if you were to take 4 birds and you make them know you as their master, they recognize you. It's not the other way around. Surhunna ilayka. That's actually, the words are like this. Make them familiar with you. Why is that important if you're just chopping them, right? Make them familiar with you, and then take those birds and you were to place them on, it has to be then 4 hilltops, based on the fact that there are 4 birds which are still alive, and then call them back, and they will come to you at speed. And you can understand how this works, Ibrahim. So why would you find it hard to understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, having created everything and imprinted his identity as their maker upon every cell of their being, then when he calls them back, they would come to him. They would come back from the dead. They would rise from their graves. Every piece of them, even if they were scattered upon all the hilltops of the earth and buried in every valley and drowned in every sea, they will come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like these birds come back to their maker. So this is the synopsis of Abu Muslim's view. I ended up making some sort of novel arguments for it. I won't go into sort of the intricacies of the words just now, because obviously our time is limited, but I will maybe just show you one table from my paper. And this is something we shared the links already in our study.
The table was very nice because you put both arguments and counter arguments. And
you can
you didn't mention it now, but in one of your podcasts you mentioned, then why did Allah use such an ambiguous word? Because I looked at Tabari as well. I tried to do some research as well, but your paper helped a lot. And I liked your point that why it was both a word that was used somewhat has both meanings in the language. And the point that Ustadh Sohaib is making is that normally with these miracles, the side that sort of tends to shy away, if I call it shy away from the miraculous nature, tends to be the more majazi reading. But in here, that's not the case. It's actually, it's a very literal reading, actually. It's very close to or if not closer. On some words, I would say it's the stronger one, perhaps. For example, particularly fasurhunna ilayk, that bit, I think the thing is stronger. But then I realized the Jumhur Tafasir also take that training meaning on board, but they just insert faqattihunna, like taqdir, but in terms of fasur, that's closer. But the juz bit, I understand that one can be a part, but I'd say the first meaning to the mind, al-mana, what's al-mutabadir ila dhihin, the cut pieces is perhaps more, but maybe that could be. I mean,
I was of that view once upon a time, right? But then I realized, that you can ponder on it more, this juz part, because the Jumhur view also involves quite a complicated explanation of juz, because a juz in the ordinary meaning would be snap off a piece of the bird and put one piece, but they're saying actually mix them all together and all this business, which is not the mutabadir or the obvious meaning of juz actually. They're saying a piece of the mixture of all their bodies, right? Mm-hmm. So if they were to say, a piece, okay, then they would be closer to the meaning of the words. But Elsewhere in the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jalla says regarding hellfire, لَهَا سَبْعَةُ أَبْوَابٍ لِكُلِّ بَابٍ مِّنْهُمْ جُزْءٌ مَقْسُومٌ. Every gate of the hellfire has, from these unbelievers and the wicked people, an apportioned juz. So nobody is going to think now limbs and pieces of the unbelievers are put through different gates of the because you understand that a juz from a larger number is a smaller number. It's a subset. So this is a clear Quranic usage as well. But I got, because I don't like to discard, like if I see that, look, the vast majority read it this way, I think there's something in that. So then I start to think maybe there is an intended wordplay almost, that it's to actually remind you of what these birds are standing in for as a symbol. They're standing in for the pieces or the components of the human being. So literally like the limbs or the body and the soul, because the soul could also be a juz of the, you know, of the reality of the human being. So place on each of them a bird which is a juz and representing a juz of the insan, right? So that, I think, then is, rather than just, you know, what I don't like to do is just to explain away a problem to make it, you know, possible and allowed, but in fact to try to explain the perfection of this word, the fact that Allah Azza wa Jalla used the word surhunna. That's what one thing I will highlight, which you know, is where I added something to the argument for Abu Muslim. I hope he's happy. I hope he's in a good place, despite being a Mu'tazili, right? So I hope that he'll be happy that I defended his view. But more importantly, of course, what we're trying to do is to understand Allah's words correctly, right? So you know, the core of that is to listen to what Allah Azza wa Jalla says, pay attention to His words, and then the ulama have given us the methods of interpreting, and we should follow those methods soundly. Is it possible that sometimes they reached a conclusion that was not absolutely the correct one? You know, in some matters we would say, no, it's impossible for them to have got it wrong collectively, because you know, that, you know, we need to know about how to do our salah, and we need to know about zakah, we need to know about hajj, and on these things the collective view of the Muslims has to be right. Is it possible, I'm suggesting it is, that on some things, like interpreting a certain story in the Quran, that most of them could have gone with a view that was not quite accurate, but still some of the Muslims, there must have been some that understood. It can't be that we discovered it centuries later from nothing. And my conviction would be, if this is right, if Abu Muslim's view is right, then it's not Abu Muslim that came up with it, in fact, but it was around before him. And undoubtedly, according to my theological and prophetological understanding, that the Prophet ﷺ must have also understood it that way. We don't have a proof either way of what the Prophet ﷺ understood, because there's no marfu' hadith that says so. So the other side is, in a way, assuming that the Prophet ﷺ understood it as the chopping and you know, actual resurrection that happened in this ayah. And I may assume otherwise, right? Because this is where, you know, when you said this thing about it's like you see it, only in Abu Muslim's view, in my opinion, only in Abu Muslim's view, it's like you've seen it. The same way that Ibrahim saw it, you know, because once you visualize this procedure, you understand it exactly as he was made to understand it by being told this. So just like one final thing, just because it's cool, right? And I don't mind if you've got some objections and whatnot, we can discuss. But see, the words surhunna, I have quite extensive discussion about it, but this I love. Look, we have in the...
Do you mind if you expanded?
Like make it bigger?
No. Yeah, just zoom in.
Yeah,
no.
Better?
Yeah.
So this is part of the paper that's... if you want to look it up, by the way, it's called Fights and Flights. So you put Fights and Flights, Sohaib Saeed, you'll find it's all open access on the Journal of Quranic Studies. So the word surhunna, why was that used then, right? Whether it means chop them, why was a clearer word for chop not used? That's one question. But likewise, if it means incline them, why was it a clearer or more common word for incline not used? Amilhunna ilayk. You know, that's more common in the Quran. Mail is a very common word in the Quran, and surhunna, it only occurs here. The word sur, meaning incline, is only used here. So, however, the word does have a relationship with the word sawara or taswir, and it also has a relationship with sur, وَنُفِخَ فِي الصُّورِ. And I think that's يعني في غاية الدقة والإتقان. I think this is such a beautiful, subtle thing in the ayah, and I believe it's intended by the Creator subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he has pointed to the fact that he is al-Musawwir. And the Musawwir is the one who creates perfectly and according to a perfect plan and fashions things. But also, we can take it to mean kind of the one who creates it according to, a way that imprints his identity upon the creation, right? So it's more a common Christian expression that God created man in his image. But we have, of course, hadith, that Allah Azza wa Jalla created Adam ala suratihi, right? Ala suratihi, and then there's discussion around what's meant by this. But surah, right? So the point is that this is what, in a way, connects us with our Maker, right? The taswir. And that's exactly the point that is being made about surhunna ilayk, that imprint your identity on them, make them yours, make them know you, so when you call them, they come back to you. And what is the word for the blowing of the trumpet at the end of the time? وَنُفِخَ فِي الصُّورِ. And this corresponds to ثُمَّ أَدْعُهُنَّ يَأْتِينَكَ سَعْيًا. So this is my addition to a part of my addition to Abu Muslim's argument. It's like not a clincher by itself, but once you accept the basic premise, then this meaning only becomes actioned in Abu Muslim's view.
Yeah, I like your point at the end that you said clearly Allah SWT could have used a word like قَطِّعْهُنَّ or أَمِلْهُنَّ إِلَيْكَ. So the fact that such a somewhat ambiguous word, and because the word does have because there's actually two qira'at, you can read it with a kasra or a dhamma.
Surhunna and surhunna, yeah.
And one of them is slightly closer to the cutting meaning, and the other one is slightly closer, according to some views, to the
that's right, yeah,
training to murabbi meaning. And Imam Tabari gives all these evidences for it. So for me as well, there's a qira'atain, but I like to think of it what's the thing? I'malu riwayatain ala awla. So to take a meaning that takes both of them is somehow, for me personally, more preferable. So I do feel comfortable with the Jumhur opinion, because I'm also thinking, where did they get it from? I mean, usually with the Israeliyat thing, it's very obvious, or one or two sources, but this one is like Israeliyat, like in Tawatarat, it's quite pervasive. And I know there's a lot of Qila and Qaz, but so if there's it's almost like the majority of the Salaf up to Tabi'een, if not Sahaba, understood it that way. So to take an interpretation that perhaps both could have happened, or it happened physically with the cutting of Ibrahim alayhi's time, and for us now at a more imaginative, rational way, and maybe that's where the word intakes both. And also because usually when the prophets ask for the sign, like Zakaria alayhi asked for a sign, and he was not
who's the only other person who said in the Quran, Arini?
Musa alayhi salam.
Right, and then what happened when he asked, Arini anzur ilayk?
Allah said you can't, and Imam Bukhari mentions that actually. He says, but he was still shown a sign. He was shown a miraculous sign. The mountain crumbled.
Right. But the point is that you cannot have what you like, but here is the thing that you can have.
That's right.
That can be the correspondence.
There was one view over here. It says actually Ibrahim alayhi wanted to ask to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he said it talwihan. And so he got the response that you can't ask for that because Allah is Azizun Hakim, as the word ends. He also got the response talwihan, indicatively, not explicitly. Whereas Musa alayhi salam asked explicitly and got the response explicitly. So there's that one view there. But yeah, so because the prophets usually when they ask for a sign, they get given a sign. I'm thinking because of that, I tend to prefer it. But overall, I really liked your article, and maybe our brothers and sisters listening to this is an example of how a deep dive to a verse looks into. Sometimes there's difficulties, and sometimes it's really a language thing. It goes to this linguistically, both are quite valid. And I had difficulty with the ilayk part because at first I was a bit of a why is the ilayk there? Then I guess maybe there's also that view of taqdeem and ta'khir. It could be fakhudh ilayk khuz arbat, like take 4 birds to you. Fasurhunna. There could be
but you see how awkward that is. And part of the difficulty is then again, when people are complaining, people are rejecting Abu Muslim's view, they sometimes say, oh, it's khilaf al-zahir, khilaf al-mutawat, and then they're saying, khudh ilayka, but ilayka is over here, but we're going to attach it to khud over there.
Yeah.
And it's extremely awkward. So even if it's just about possible, one cannot say that that is zahir.
That's right.
In fact, a better complaint, and this was made by Muhammad Abu Zahra in the 20th century, he says Abu Muslim's view is based upon like the zahir of the text without taking into account the context, which I also think is a wrong complaint. But at least it's actually more accurate about the fact that Abu Muslim's view corresponds to the words more clearly.
That's right.
But you see, there is a sense of conditioning. Like, if you always heard the story, you heard the story before reading the ayah. This is how Rashid Rida puts it. He said that people would never have thought this were it not for certain riwayat that made them see it that way. And I think also that we, from a childhood, we heard this story, what this ayah is about. It's hard to unsee it. And also then people say things like, but in your view, or Abu Muslim's view, where is the miracle? So I'm saying, and where in the ayah does it say that there's a miracle in this ayah? Are you also denying that Allah can bring things? No, of course not. Like, just in the ayah before he did it, no one's denying that.
That's
and
right.
There might be some people who have like kind of a strange aqidah or something, and they have a problem with the idea that in this ayah, it could be that Ibrahim alayhi salam was given some, to chop some birds and they came back to life. For me, there is zero problem with that conceptually. It could absolutely have been that way. I just don't think that that's actually what the ayah is describing. I do like to try to activate both views. I would do it in this way that I highlighted here, which is to say, the point may be, even if you chop them, and even if you kill them, and even if you distributed them, not just upon 4 mountains, but upon every mountain on the earth, if your bond with them was strong enough, they would come back to you. And that is exactly how it is when Allah Azza wa Jal calls things back. So
what does Ibn Ashur say? I'm interested. What does Ibn Ashur say?
Ibn Ashur he discusses this verse fairly briefly. He just presents the standard view. I think there was maybe one point that he makes that is slightly additional or different from the standard, because he says, "Khudh arba'atan min at-tayr," take 4 from the birds. If you take it just as it is like that. I think he suggests that it could mean take 4 pieces of a bird.
Right? Okay. Yeah.
So maybe even it could be 1 bird.
Yeah.
Which then take 4 pieces. He suggests that that's another possible way of reading it. Not necessarily.
As in the min is for tab'id, not for tabyin. Okay. Yeah.
Maybe or even up to that, like from out. For tab'id, partitive. So I don't think that he particularly wants to push that view, but he mentions it as a possibility, which is useful, of course.
Did the Turkish people say anything? I'm sure they would have. They didn't quote Abu Muslim's view?
No, they don't.
What's interesting that a number of translators in the 20th century did take it. Some of them did so because, again, like where they're coming from theologically, sometimes they belong to a certain sect that sort of has a problem with the idea of resurrection within this dunya and things like this. And then others may have been influenced by them, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's important to not necessarily label a view based on who has defended it, right? Because
I agree.
This is a view that belongs also to some. This view belongs to some of the Mu'tazila or some of the rationalists or some of even the Ahmadiyya, right, in the modern times. It doesn't mean that it belongs to them. It may just be that they happen to have supported this view while others did not. Right? Because I don't have sympathy to, this group or that group. But when it comes to the ayah, I think that they happen to be on the right side of it.
We have to look at the merits of every argument, put aside who it is sometimes that makes it. Some people in the modern times, and I think that's a common thing, they seem to have an allergy for miracles. So if only they had said it and they were the first people to say it, I've seen it in other examples, kunu qiradatan khanazir and all that. It's just like they would just jump onto any metaphorical meaning that's but the miraculous meaning. But here it's not a case, it's a linguistic one. And but yeah, it was an interesting case.
Yeah,
I actually had no idea about Abu Muslim's view, to be honest. So thank you for enlightening us. I went and read the section from Razi as well. So, but I didn't pick up about the subtle things about Qadi Abu Jabbar and all that. I just assumed that was his word as well.
Yeah, this is because I work on Razi, if you remember. So I put together I put two and two together and realized that he is probably quoting Qadi Abdul Jabbar, because we've lost Abdul Jabbar's tafsir. It's not extant anymore. Abu Muslim's tafsir is not extant anymore. So I only know them through those who quoted them, chiefly Al-Razi.
Yeah. We had a mutakhassis students studying tafsir of Razi, and Ustadh Sohaib gave him a presentation on the Razi. It was really nice. I really enjoyed that. When he quotes a Makhshari, when he doesn't, and based on that, he was quoting possibilities of other. Really nice presentation. So, alhamdulillah. We had a brother, Ustadh Faridun from Herat here in Afghanistan, from Zaytuna College, actually. And then I told him about our tafsir work, and he's also a big Fakhruddin Razi, because he's buried there. He's buried in Herat, Afghanistan, and he's been to his grave. Naam, inshallah. All right, maybe we'll continue. 40 minutes. That's what Imam Baqai was saying. There's something special about the four, and he quotes a hadith. The best of company are 4 company, the best of bu'uth are 40, and then the best of something is 400, and the best of jaysh is 4,000. And we've spent 40 minutes on this verse about the 4 words.
Yes.
Ustaz Ahmed, you're the infaq specialist. Tafaddal. So if you have a faith like Ibrahim alayhi salam, as yaqeen as his, then you're naturally going to be as giving as he was. Hence now, there's this thing that he has this notion of he loved to always eat with people, like making infaq. So in a way, in the verses come, once you've reached that level of yaqeen, now you got to give the haqq of it.
Yeah, we hear that story all the time. Ibrahim alayhi salam used to eat. Is that, I mean,
Manaqib,
I've always related there as a manqib.
But in the Quran, the angels come, he sacrifices a sheep, a fat one, and then a quality one. And then he gets scared when the guests don't eat it. No.
So, Zaid, do you want to share your screen, or I guess we don't have to.
For the translation, yeah, let's pull it back up.
Yeah, maybe turn to 6. We could move on.
Imam Baqai says that it goes back to that, la shafa'ata wala bay'a wala khulla. So the discussion returns to what can benefit on a day when no interceder can intercede, or close friendships of benefit, and that is the sadaqah and amal salihah.
There is the hadith, Ibn Kathir mentions, a man brought a camel with its bridle on and said, "O Messenger of Allah, this is in the sake of Allah." And the Prophet says, "You will get 700 camels as reward for it on the day of resurrection." So, and then there's the hadith where every good deed that the son of Adam performs will be multiplied 10-fold to 700-fold, except fasting. And then the hadith continues about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward the fasting.
There's no limit.
There's no limit to that. So, and
the verse just stays, it's like every habba and every habba sumbul, every sumbul has got another 100 seeds, but then Allah expands, yudha'ifu liman yasha, and then it ends at wasi'un. It just keeps growing, just like the hadith, from 10 to 700 to more. Yeah.
There's about 14 verses here that follow one another, just on infaq. Like the Diana Tafsir mentions, kind of captures all this in 5 different topics as to what these verses, the next 14 verses we'll talk about. The first one is that it teaches us the purpose of infaq, like why it should be done, and that it should only be done for the sake of Allah. The second one says that it shouldn't come with other, like it shouldn't be as in someone is now indebted to you or you make them feel that way. The third one is that you don't give from the less, I guess, you give, or you produce good quality. You give from your quality of whatever you have. The fourth, it says, is it should be given to people who have an excuse not to not work, and hence not be able to make that income. And finally, the importance of infaq in the benefits that it brings for this world and the next world. So just as a quick overview of the next 14 verses based on those 5 things. So one thing that I really kind of liked was, like, obviously Ustadh Sohaib will go into a bit more detail, but like the purpose of infaq says that to basically eradicate poverty, to give people an opportunity to be able to have their livelihood and live with dignity. And it talks about how Islam as a societal norm brings 3 things that aims to prevent people living without their dignity in poverty. It says the first one is that Islam encourages people to work and make a living, and the Prophet says a person has not contributed anything better than what his hand has earned. And then second is the infaq, so those people who can't work, but then they can be provided with things. And the third thing it mentions is israf, to prevent israf, because a lot of the goods are really distributed in a small number of people, but then these people put it to waste, unfortunately, where they could use it differently. So those 3 things were important as well in establishing that society that Islam encourages. But yeah, we can maybe move.
Yeah, for 262, it says that man and other is repeated. ثم لا يتبعون ما أنفقوا منا ولا أذى. Here Imam Baqai says the fact that the la is repeated, it shows, he says that the man means to remind the person that you've given it to them, while other is to remind others that you've given to X. So one is like, just if someone said alam unfiq alayk, haven't I spent on you, even if he says it privately to you, that's man. And it's only something al-minnatu lillahi wa lirrasuli, only Allah and the messenger have the right to do minnat. But human beings, because we only وَأَحْسِنُوا كَمَا وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ, spend of what we have provided them. It's really Allah's, we're just the caretakers. There's no real, it's almost like shirk, because the next verses say that it's like the one who spends in showing off. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala equates it to shirk in a way, riyah. And then other as well too. And also, and yeah, we'll get to it with other verses, but there's this recitation about the tasbeet and lahum, where the general view that I get is zakat is a very important thing. It's not just simply make an online donation, transfer, and you're done. But there's almost this effort have to be spent in trying to find the right recipients. And the more innocent and taqwa the recipients are, the better your zakat is, in a way. That's sort of the understanding I get of this general ethics. Particularly those who are shy to ask, but they're really in need of it. The more you have those cases, the more, in a way. Yeah, okay. That's what I personally understand. Should we?
Yeah. So yeah, it's just some general points as well. Ibn Ashur's discussion on the opening of this passage. I mean, he points out how there's this whole system of money and economy and important things we have to know about the Muslim ummah and our responsibility towards money. Different aspects of it are covered in different ayat, about how we earn it, about how we do not hoard it. We have to have some flow between those who need and those who have. And then there are certain responsibilities which are placed as obligations, and other things as strongly encouraged. And here in this passage, he sees that actually there's two aspects that are actually being talked about. The first of them, fi sabilillah, is this expression is mainly connected with the situation of jihad and going forth in Allah's way, and that has also been touched on at various points in the surah. It's kind of also a subtext that runs through the surah, the situation that the Muslims are in, what is about to happen, what is currently happening, what has happened, right? So there is a need then to spend in support of the cause. Essentially, we can put that in the broadest sense, in the cause of the religion, and secondly, for the needs of people, right? So when in ayah 261, 262, there's a mention of fi sabilillah, this is now thinking about the cause, as you see in the translation.
What are the benefits Islam and Muslims, perhaps, right?
Well,
yeah.
The thing is that a charitable deed doesn't have to be done to a Muslim either. Only, you can give to those who are needy outside. So you may say that, but that's not what Ibn Ashur is saying, right? So he's saying that fi sabilillah is in the cause of defense of the religion. And then what's mentioned in 263 onwards is more general in a sense, also for the needs of people. The man and adha in the case of supporting the cause is a bit different from the man and adha towards people. So this perspective then it just slightly changes what you get from the kind of repetition that exists of the mention of these terms in the ayahs, because man and adha, when you've given for the public good, is to obviously promote yourself and to boost yourself. That I gave such and such to support this cause, and therefore I have an important position, and I demand to be heard, and that my opinions must be respected. So then, for a person, of course, is to go back and, as you said, harass them and expect favors from them, to hold it against them. There's a nice quote from Zamakhshari.
Really good. I never thought of it like that. Man and adha for the public good. When you have charity dinners, if you have some of our donors, business donors, if they give a significant amount, they shouldn't be feeling like they have a right to yamununa alayka. There shouldn't be any.
Well, also, like if someone gives to your institution or my institution, then it's where you have strings attached, right? And especially if those strings were not attached from the beginning, and they said, like, I'm giving it on this condition. But if they give and they say, look, I'm just supporting your work, and then later on they're sending you, like, why have you done it there like this, or why have you spent it like that? This is where they attach strings after, right? So the best thing is, of course, for there to be no strings attached, or if there are strings, at least to have clarity that this is this type of donation, or not donation. Then it's more like a kind of contractual agreement,
sponsorship.
A sponsorship and contract, whatever. That's
like the corporate word for man, fi sabilillah.
Yeah, I think this is something that sometimes you experience on on the lesser battlefields, right? So the quote from Zamakhshari I thought was very nice, but it'll need a little bit of thought. طعم الآلاء أحلى من المن وهو أمر من الآلاء عند المن. Okay, so this is one of those wordplay things, right? Because the word ala comes twice, and the word man comes twice, right? But in the first case, طعم الآلاء أحلى من المن. So the taste of favors, from فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان, right? So the taste of these favors, أحلى من المن, is sweeter than manna, as we saw before, al-manna was-salwa, right?
Al-manna was-salwa, okay.
وهو, but هو أمر من الآلاء عند المن. So ala is also the name of a tree with very bitter leaves. However, it's more bitter than ala when there is man. Man in the sense of the coming and reminding people of the favors, right? So yeah, very
that
good.
makes it really hard for the Arabic news.
طعم الآلاء أحلى من المن وهو أمر من الآلاء عند المن.
Do you mind if you share that in the group as well?
Inshallah. No problem.
Yeah, so we have to look at it from these two angles, like giving and man and other, at a communal level for the cause of Islam, and man another for poor people and where individuals are involved. The last analogy at the bottom of the page is really beautiful. I really like it. Like the example of those who spend. It's like a smooth rock. You know the smooth rocks, like they're very, very hard, but there's dirt over it. And so the person thinks that they can, plant a seed and grow something on it because it looks like, like there's good soil. But then once the wabil, is it the wabil here? Yes. When the wabil comes, which is the heavy rain, all that's left is that smooth, shiny rock, nothing else. So it's like they've spent their charity, but there's no, whereas the other one gives sumbul, it's like a really matching analogy, the plantation analogy, but here it's nothing remained for them. And then as opposed to like all these analogies, I think Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya has got a book of something of amthal in the Qur'an, of these analogies in the Qur'an. They're sort of linked image-wise, because the next verse or two verses after it, it says, as for those who spend for fi mardatillah, it's like they've got a garden in a high land. And so if it rains, it's like good, but even if it doesn't, the moist air will, that's in total contradiction to what this one is. La tubtilu sadaqatikum. That in the Hanafi fiqh, it's also very important not to cancel the deeds. They also see it as almost haram. Hence, if you start a fasting and you break it, then it's wajib on you to make it up. It's in Surah Muhammad, La tubtilu a'malakum, something, if I'm not mistaken. I will let the Hafiz correct us. And then the very end, Allahu la yahdi qawm al-kafirin. God does not guide the disbelieving people. This could be both disbelieving in terms of disbelievers to in Allah, because it says they do not believe in Allah on the last day, or could be in the general kufran and ni'mah. And I also noticed that la yahdi, there's two types of hidayah from Allah. One is to show you the guidance, فَمَّا هَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ, to show them the two ways, bid-dalala. And the other one is to show them with the heart and tawfiq, to guide their hearts. إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ. Here it means that their hearts were not guided.
The verse 262 says that the reason of revelation was before the Tabuk expedition. Uthman radiallahu anh covers all the needs of the fighters, and then Abdurrahman ibn Auf radiallahu anh gives half of his wealth. So it said that verse 262 was revealed about that. So obviously it's quite a generous giving there. But then the next verse just says, a kind word and forgiveness is better than a charitable deed, followed by what, hurtful other once again. We know the people who will be on the day of judgment, the first people to be thrown into the hellfire, like the qari, the generous. So sometimes I think the gravity or the magnitude of a deed should not perhaps trick us to think that that's better. Same thing, it's not the blood and the flesh that reaches Allah, but it's a taqwa from Him. So doing it for the right intention, and I guess, the Diana Tafsir was talking about it. The first thing that it mentions is the purpose, the intention. Why are you giving? And if you're giving for the sake of Allah anyway, then why should you think that you can have, you can hurt others when this money is not yours and you're not the one who's giving? You're just redistributing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wealth to other people. So sometimes perhaps just saying nice words are better.
Nice words and forgiveness. Imam Bukhari says that it's sometimes when you don't give, maybe especially in the old days, they used to give directly to the poor people. These days we have a lot of intermediaries. But if you don't give sometimes to the old person, the beggar, sometimes they can say bad words to you for not giving. And so in that situation, forgiveness is also a kind word, and forgiveness put together is better than
Yeah, and a more general point as well, that sometimes you do a good deed on the outside, it's a good deed, but it turns out worse for you because of some harm that you caused to others. Then you basically have cancelled out the goodness in that deed. You may as well have not done it. You would have been better off not doing it, right? And that's sad, But I think we have to, like, I sometimes think about, like, people are trying to get to touch the black stone. They're at the Kaaba, and they're like, I am going to step on 100 necks to get there, right? And you're like, really, wallahi, do you think that the reward you got from touching the black stone, kissing the black stone, is greater than the sin that you have earned from how many people you elbowed and hurt on the way to get there? How do we make these calculations? Sometimes we're and going back to the sort of the part in the ayahs before about the multiplication of rewards. What will multiply the rewards is the sincerity, the manners, and all of these things are part of what makes something rewarding. It is not a pure hard calculation, and people do this as well when it comes to, if I read this much of the Quran, I get this number of hasanat, and our technologists have started to implement this idea into people's minds even more. They've got apps now that tell you how many hasanat did you get. Allah knows best how many hasanat you got. So sometimes, we're trying to turn things into a cold, hard calculation instead of recognizing the spirit in these things. Allah Azza wa Jalla is promising rewards, the multiplication of rewards, but you will multiply it by doing things in the best way that you can, with the best sincerity, with the best manners. And you've got to be careful that you don't spoil those deeds, and maybe spoil not just the deed that you were doing, but spoil every other deed, right? When we stand for our salah, we know that the great reward in salah, especially as it's an obligation, and then it's an act of worship in its own right, the remembrance of Allah, the humility before Allah. But if you stand and the whole time you're thinking about something else, the reward in it could be very, very little. But then, in addition, if you did that salah purely to show off to someone else, it could be not a source of reward at all. In fact, it can become the opposite. So this is a very, very important principle that underlies these ayat, among others. But these ayat really spell that out very effectively if we pay attention, and then we apply this to other things in our life.
Should we move to the next page?
Sure.
Okay, let's see the next page.
It's really nice though, like, to see 3 pages of infaq. Like, I think we underestimate this, to be honest. Like, it's just such emphasis to giving here in the Quran. It's
and it's clearly not all zakat. It's way more than zakat.
It gives us many different layers, of course, but just to be talking about infaq, page after page, like, everyone should be doing something. That's what it's telling me. Like, yeah. Should we recite? Ustadh Saeed, do you mind reciting, if that's okay? I'm not in a position to recite tonight, so.
I am ready, inshallah.
ومثل الذين ينفقون أموالهم ابتغاء مرضات الله وتثبيتا من أنفسهم كمثل جنة بربوة أصابها وابل فآتت أكلها ضعفين فإن لم يصبها وابل فطل والله بما تعملون بصير أيود أحدكم أن تكون له جنة من نخيل وأعناب تجري من تحتها الأنهار له فيها من كل الثمرات وأصابه الكبر وله ذرية ضعفاء فأصابها إعصار فيه نار فاحترقت
كذلك يبين الله لكم الآيات لعلكم تتفكرون يا أيها الذين آمنوا أنفقوا من طيبات ما كسبتم ومما أخرجنا لكم من الأرض ولا تيمموا الخبيث منه تنفقون ولستم بآخذيه إلا أن تغمضوا فيه واعلموا أن الله غني حميد الشيطان يعدكم الفقر ويأمركم بالفحشاء والله يعدكم مغفرة منه وفضلا والله واسع عليم يؤتي الحكمة من يشاء ومن يؤت الحكمة فقد أوتي خيرا كثيرا وما يذكر إلا أولو الألباب. But those who spend their wealth in order to gain God's approval and as an affirmation of their own faith are like a garden on a hill. Heavy rain falls and it produces double its normal yield. Even if no heavy rain falls, it will still be watered by the dew. God sees all that you do. That is so nice, dew and do, huh? Would any of you like to have a garden of palm trees and vines, graced with flowing streams and all kinds of produce? But when you are afflicted with old age and feeble offspring, it is struck by a fiery whirlwind and burnt down. In this way, God makes his messages clear to you so that you may reflect on them. You who believe, give charitably from the good things you have acquired and what we have produced for you from the earth. Do not pick out such bad things to give which you would only accept through closed eyes. Remember that God is self-sufficient, worthy of all praise. Satan threatens you with poverty and commands you to do foul deeds. God promises you his forgiveness and his abundance. God is limitless and all-knowing, and he gives wisdom to whomever he wills. Whoever is given wisdom has truly been given much good, but only those with insight bear this in mind.
Maybe I could start with the hadith, which the famous hadith about the fasting. Whoever fasts Ramadan with faith and expectation, like having that belief that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward him, then she be rewarded for it. So this, I guess, also comes down to the verse 265. وَتَثْبِيتًا مِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ. Like, it's as long as, I guess, when we do a good deed, in this case, it's to give charity. We have to have yaqeen. That's what one thing that's following through, with Ibrahim alayhi salam, we just talked about. Doing an act and believing in it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you for it is very important. And we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even, let's say, if it's not a wabil, even if it's not a heavy rain, then as Ustadh Sadeq had mentioned before, the moist or a bit of sprinkle can even produce good as well, as long as you're sincere, you're doing it for the sake of Allah. Once again, yeah, I guess that's one thing.
And the verse ending with Allah sees with all that you do, it's a bit of a tarheeb and targheeb. If you're of those spending for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it's targheeb, like encouraging you. But if it's of those where you're giving man and other, and you don't have the sincerity or the tathbeet that you mentioned, then it's a bit of a warning, like a tarhib. And the tathbeet, there is that one interpretation which means like more like tasabbut, find out the really needy people. I think even I remember Imam Tahawi mentioning. Imam Bukhari doesn't mention it as that's one of those meanings, but I believe it's not the popular one. Ustadh Sohaib, would that be correct?
Sorry, and what's the two meanings?
The second one is tathbitan min anfusihim, as in seeking out, making tathabbut, that those you're giving charity to are really in need of it.
Oh, I see. I'm not sure, but
yeah,
it could be possible.
Well, I guess part of the tafsir was that I think we're going to come to that verse, but we give, and that's our responsibility with seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure. There's a hadith which talks about a man who goes out one night, wants to give sadaqah. First night he gives it to an adulteress, second night gives it to a rich person, third night gives it to a thief, and then the person says his charity was accepted. So he's given unknowingly. So,
okay.
and the interpretation was that I guess we can try to do our due diligence, but we give it, and
forgive it. Yeah.
I guess if the other side is not in the recipient group, then it's still okay.
Yeah, due diligence shouldn't stop someone from giving, because if you're not giving, it's like shaitan. If you're saying, because I'm worried I'll do man and other, I won't give sadaqah, we're not giving. It'll be like Satan attacking you from the right side if you don't give at all, just because you're not doing enough due diligence. And it comes to us a lot. We see poor people and we're like, oh, they're using it for some sort of drugs or something. Let's say if you're in this Western world, if you walk around the cities, I don't know, but maybe sometimes you shouldn't stop you from giving.
And not that we give them thousands of dollars on the spot. We just give them $10 or something, $20.
Just fatal.
That's what,
So Ibn Ashur does mention two views about tathbeet, but the first one is this sense of how we follow up our claims with actions. We affirm our beliefs by implementing them, and that has then an effect of strengthening what is inside, right? The more that you act with consistency, you ingrain the good habits and traits within ourselves. As Imam al-Ghazali, when talking about the issue of akhlaq, the inner traits, this is something that can be affected, of course, by the outer, right? So they can be separated, but they can be looked at separately, but there's a reinforcement and a strengthening of the inner state through behaving well on the outside and giving and separating ourselves from the love of wealth and becoming better at giving, right? Developing a habit, which means that we are then, as people, we are more beautiful on the inside and we are more pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we find it difficult to give, then then your giving is definitely very rewardable. I think that people get a little bit maybe possibly confused on this point. There is an idea, I think, that if someone finds it easy to give, then that is less reward for them. And if someone finds it very difficult to give, they would get more reward. You can kind of look at it that way because you're thinking they've done a more act against themselves and had to
struggle.
So there is goodness in that struggle. But that would mean then if you become also a person who has a good habit of giving, that you end up getting less reward later on. And I don't think that's right. Just like people misunderstand the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ about recitation, where he mentions al-mahiru bil-Qur'an, the one who is skillful with the Qur'an, has a strong relationship, is with the noble recording angels. But one who stutters and stammers and finds it difficult will have two rewards. And some people translate that as a double reward. And some people translate that as twice the reward of the first guy, which I think is also completely wrong, even though there are some of the ulama who said this. But I think it's the wrong explanation, because again, it sells short the idea of the malaka and the trait and the akhlaq. A person who finds it easy to recite the Quran, why? Probably because they spent a lot of time struggling and getting past that stammering stage. Should their reward then be halved because you find it too easy, no reward for you? Actually, there's merit in finding something easy. Some people to whom Allah Azza wa Jalla gives that to freely, and other people who work hard for it. So to become a generous person, this is Imam Ghazali's framework. A generous person isn't someone who gives a lot. That's not the proof of being generous, because he might find it very hard to give a lot, or he might also be doing it for a bad reason. The generous person is someone who finds it easy to give a lot. That's what it means to be generous. I could give, and inshallah I'm rewarded, but I'm a stingy person by nature. But then I need to break that stinginess, وَتَثْبِيتًا مِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ, right? I need to break that bad quality of stinginess and miserliness within myself, primarily by giving, and giving again, and giving again until it becomes easy. And then you're a better person. You're a better person.
I should know people, Ustadh Sohaib, who get uncomfortable when they don't give. Like they've made it such a malaka that when they don't give, honestly, they don't feel right. So,
and there's people who, when they don't recite Quran, they don't feel that their day is complete. This is where it becomes part of you, rather than something forced. And we want to become those people, right?
Yeah. I think particularly given the worldliness of today's world, perhaps these three verses really speak loudly.
Yeah, I actually wanted to touch on that. Like, there's this concept of securing your future-proofing. I see that with people around me, sometimes youth, they talk about retiring, I don't know, at the age of, let's say, 30, 25, or just like very excessive planning for, it's very common, I guess, with your retirement. I think in the West a bit more, where you may not have the family to support you, so you got to think of all these things. But I think it comes at a cost of your yaqeen in a way. At the same time, I know it's a fine line to walk. At the end of the day, you do need to think about your dunya too. But then this excessive thought about your future, securing your future, making sure that it's bulletproof. I feel that it also goes like, as an affirmation of their own faith. Is there perhaps a lack of that when that's the case? So, yeah.
I think if it's wasadaqa burhanun, that excessive planning is a burhan of the lack of faith. They say tie the camel, but I feel sorry for the camel, because I think they took the verse fasurhunna, they've chopped up the camel, they've tied it so hard that its neck it's lost its breathing capability, its leg has come off. I told someone the other day, I said, if I was an insurance company, I would use tie your camels and insure with us, because they're the most ruthless people. That bit has really been misunderstood. Yeah, I think I agree. Tul al-amal, Imam Ghazali talks about these things, excessive planning. And then that stops them from spending, actually, doesn't it, in a way? Because every cent has to go to some sort of a saving or something.
People don't go to Hajj, and people don't, even they're held back from spending, as you said, unfortunately. So, yeah.
Allahumma aftah lana abwab al-infaq. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen.
Inshallah.
So where are we in this ayat? We're sort of talking in general, a thematic way, which is fine.
Yeah.
Roughly, that's where we are today.
I think 266, because then a second example is given that's even more emotional for those who do give, I think, out of man and other. That's more than just having your vegetation, finding it out that was growing on a solid rock. But if you were to leave children that are feeble, yet you've got this big garden, in a way, it also shows, I guess, those who give with the wrong intentions, but how much in need of they would be of that garden, and their kids will be in need of it.
Ibn Kathir talks about a person who actually initially in his life does spend,
but then and does good deeds, but then he actually stops providing as well. Yeah, so the shaitan, stops him from doing his good works. So his good works also get annulled by that as well. And I was thinking about how important istiqamah is. Like, I mean, you could do these good works for a while, but then when you stop, again, that becomes a bit dangerous. There's a hadith of the Prophet. It says, "Oh Allah, make your biggest provision for me when I'm old in age and at the time my life ends."
I haven't heard that before.
Yeah, so I guess we need, I think, our best deeds, inshallah, like important deeds towards the end of our lives.
So you could give them more sadaqah?
We start risking. I'm not too sure if this is just related to sadaqah, but just in general, I'm assuming like rizq. I think the word that was used is rizq here. It could be, I guess, many things can be taken under risk. So and then should we move on to 67 maybe?
Yeah. So there's obviously a kind of dichotomy presented here about the nature of spending, our attitude towards it, our intentions, and this is something that I always remind my kids when it comes to we need to give some things to charity. So in the first place, it's easier for them to let go of something which they don't want to play with anymore or they don't care about anymore. But we need to sort of inculcate this spirit that you spend from what you love, right? So that's the principle in another ayah. It's more explicit or raised. The bar is raised higher. لن تنالوا البر حتى تنفقوا مما تحبون. That you spend from what you will only become really righteous once you spend from what you love. And this is something that you can find in the way of the Salaf and how they embodied this and demonstrated this, right? Whereas the easier thing is to give away something that you don't need anymore. So of course that is better than throwing it in the rubbish or the trash or wasting it or hoarding it. It's better to give it to someone who would appreciate it. But what we certainly shouldn't do is to pick out things that are broken, damaged, and really deserve to be in the recycling, and instead give it to someone, and then feel that we've done something righteous. What you've done, of course, is you disposed of something. Maybe if you dispose of it in a way that it can be then recycled, upcycled, fixed, and someone can benefit. Yeah, I mean, this again still better than than polluting the earth with the landfill and so. But what we should be aspiring for is always something better. That we give the best of what we have, and this is what is beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And here there's a very beautiful principle that underlies here, and that is so I actually wrote a paper about this as well. The golden rule from a Quranic perspective, and in hadith as well. What's called the golden rule is treat others as you would like to be treated, or do not do to others what you would not like to be done to yourself, right? So this is of course something which you can find lying under the principle mentioned in a number of ayat, and especially the hadith that's the clearest in this is that none of you truly believes until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. So here, if you would not love to receive this, why do you give it to someone else? You yourself, if you were, you would only accept it through closed eyes. It says you'd have to ignore certain blemishes and so on in order to, almost like through gritted teeth, that kind of idea, right? You'd have to turn a blind eye to its faults. So why would you then give that to someone else? And do you not feel ashamed to put that on someone else, that they have to turn a blind eye to its faults? You should give the kind of thing that you would love to receive. This is the principle that is so beautifully captured in this ayah.
I've been on the receiving end of this, Ustadh Sohaib.
Oh yeah.
I was a young boy at the time, and this man, just before Day of Eid, on Day of Arafah, he came and brought this gift, and I got so excited. I opened it up. It was pants, but they were old, patchy. To this date, I'm like, what was this person thinking? Like, why would he bring this to me as a gift? You know, like it affected me so much when at that point. But I still don't forget it. So this actually the reason of revelation Ibn Kathir says is that this is regarding the Ansar radiallahu anhum, where they would hang up ripe dates on in the masjid for the Muhajirin. Must have been those early days especially, but then some of them would put some dry dates in between them. Apparently it was like the less quality. So Ibn Kathir says that this was revealed in regards to that.
Just in terms of fiqh principle, I remember from the fiqh discussions, you know, when the, what's it called? Musaddiq. When he comes, or Musaddaq, I forgot now. When he comes to collect the zakat, they have to like take the middle, not the best of the sheep and not the worst. So I guess this is a general verse that shows perhaps the best of what you can do. But when it comes to law and zakat, which is the fard amount, you don't take the best, nor do you take the worst. It's the middle part. So I'm guessing that's because you're sort of taking it a bit by force or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's say that the obligation is the kind of moderate middle part, and then what you're called to do is give from the best, right? And this is ithar وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ. This was the way of the Ansar also, that they would give to the Muhajirin and, you know, prefer them over themselves, right? So almost like the bare minimum is treat them as your equal.
That's right.
But they were going further, and they're praised for this. Right? They would give what is better and take what is lesser for themselves, and they're seeking Allah's reward for this, and that's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I guess the future proofing goes well with 268, but
Shaitan
yeah, then like the verse following talks about hikmah, and there might be some things about munasabat, but the Diyanat Tafsir has some munasabat as well. So it was kind of mentioning like the hikmah in terms of giving is, some people think that like when you give sadaqah, at the end of the day you give from your wealth. So people who don't believe in the hereafter, or people who have weak belief in the hereafter, they might be thinking like, why are you spending your money on things which are not benefiting you? We know, like Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's father, he would say to him, at least, you know, spend the money on freeing the stronger slaves so that they could protect you. You know, that mindset, and he later becomes a Muslim as well. But the idea that the real hikmah, the real wisdom, is actually seeing the real benefit, and which is when you give, you give for your hereafter. You know, the example of when the person comes and asks Aisha radiallahu anha, what have you kept? She says, I kept the shoulder. He says, no, like you've kept whatever you gave. And so that's the real hikmah. Then it goes on to the next verse about, whoever is given hikmah is given much good. So it mentions like the hikmah. So Sohaib, you're in a better place to think about, like hakama. It's another like the root word. It's apparently used. It's what they put on the horse to control the horse from going into undesired directions and places. So it actually comes from the meaning to prevent something. So hikmah prevent us from doing the wrong things, or going in the undesired directions. So in this case, perhaps spending the money in the right place and making it in the right place.
And true wisdom here is not, as some people may think, to know all these different funds and investment methodologies and how to grow your wealth. But true wisdom, hikmah, is to see the snares of shaitan, and also to have a hikmah which has the darul ma'ad in mind, the hereafter in mind, where you do a tijara, that a business trade that helps you in the hereafter. A lot of these points, like true hikmah, or the verse لا يستوي الذين يعلمون والذين لا يعلمون, a lot of the times they get quoted, but the beginning parts of those verses are not mentioned. And the beginning of that verse is those who are spending their nights and like crying and worshipping of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The taqwa is there. And then it focuses on the ilm. And here as well, the real hikmah is to prefer what God wishes and promises you. It mentions always forgiveness and then fadla. I notice in many places forgiveness is never just mentioned alone. It's ghafurur rahim. Perhaps forgiveness stops you from being punished. Al-Rahmah gets you into Jannah. In this case, the fadla could also mean ziyada. And we know in that verse from Surah Yunus, the ziyada could be ru'yatullah, Allahu alam. Everything from him is fadl, obviously.
Yeah. On the point about the etymology of hikmah, it's interesting that a lot of the words to do with the intellect, they have this sense of restraint. Aql is related to the uqal, or the reins that you hold, your horse, or you guide the horse or the camel or whatever. So we have our bodies and our actions, and then the aql is supposed to restrain and direct that in the right way. Likewise, لَقَسَمًا لِذِي حِجْرٍ in Surah al-Fajr. The word al-hijr is used, which is a barrier as well, again, to prevent us from doing things which are harmful. So here, we are to obviously look out for the traps of shaitan, making us think that by spending in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we would become poor, and Allah Azza wa Jalla has promised us the opposite. So even if it were the case that financially we would take a hit, right, then Allah is promising something much more valuable. But something I hear all the time from the charity collectors of our time, and from the people who have their own stories, and perhaps many people listening have their own stories, you find that when you give, you never end up regretting, I should have kept that. Always something opens up from Allah's fadl in this dunya. And I don't even see that mentioned here, but it's a reality that we've all tasted. You give, and then doors of rizq just open up from where you didn't imagine. It could be you gave something, and then suddenly a job opportunity comes. It's just the kind of thing that you know through experience.
Yeah, I have that. My father-in-law firsthand, mashallah, he's given lots of charity, and he still continues to do so. And he goes, we gave and Allah gave. We gave and Allah gave.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. It's a sweetness of it's something beautiful to receive something in the dunya, right? And if anything, it's like Allah is giving you an opportunity to give more. That is the beauty of that. Of course, we don't want to receive your reward in the dunya and lose out in the akhirah. But actually, it's just doors of opportunity opening up to good people.
Should we move to the last page? Do we have time? What should we do?
We have time, inshallah, for we still have 20 minutes.
Let's do this page as well, inshallah.
You need to recite that?
If you don't mind.
270. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وما أنفقتم من نفقة أو نذرتم من نذر فإن الله يعلمه وما للظالمين من أنصار إن تبدوا الصدقات فنعما هي وإن تخفوها وتؤتوها الفقراء فهو خير لكم ويكفر عنكم من سيئاتكم والله بما تعملون خبير ليس عليك هداهم ولكن الله يهدي من يشاء وما تنفقوا من خير فلأنفسكم وما تنفقون إلا ابتغاء وجه الله وما تنفقوا من خير يوفى إليكم وأنتم لا تظلمون للفقراء الذين أحصروا في سبيل الله لا يستطيعون ضربا في الأرض يحسبهم الجاهل أغنياء من التعفف تعرفهم بسيماهم لا يسألون الناس إلحافا وما تنفقوا من خير فإن الله به عليم الذين ينفقون أموالهم بالليل والنهار سرا وعلانية فلهم أجرهم عند ربهم ولا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون اللهم اجعلنا منهم.
Whatever you may give or any pledge you make, God knows it well, and those who do wrong will have none to help them. If you give charity openly, it is well and good. But if you keep it secret and give to the needy in private, that is better for you, and it will atone for some of your bad deeds. God is well aware of all that you do. It is not for you, Prophet, to guide them. It is God who guides whomever he wills. Whatever charity you give benefits your own souls, provided you do it purely for the sake of God. Whatever you give will be repaid to you in full, and you will not be wronged. Give to those needy who are wholly occupied in God's way and cannot travel in the land for trade. The unknowing might think them rich because of their self-restraint, but you will recognize them by their signs. They are not the sort who beg people. God is well aware of any good you give. Those who give out of their own possessions by night and by day, in private and in public, will have their reward with their Lord. There is no fear for them, nor will they grieve.
Maybe, I guess just going on to 270 and 271, Ibn Kathir mentions that concealing the charity is better than disclosing it. But if there is a wisdom behind it, if there's a reason behind it that might, like for example, that someone else is going to imitate you by giving, then it could be better to disclose it. We have the obviously examples of the Prophet ﷺ as well, before expeditions, battles, where he opens up a sheet and asks people to bring. So there's that example of giving openly.
This is particularly if it's sadaqat is mentioned, it's more like the zakat money. There's not much of a showing off when it comes to observing the fard. You can look at it from that angle too. Like, You can tell people, I went to Fajr to mosque today, prayed Fard. But you might want to be a bit more reluctant to say I woke up for Tahajjud if you're worried about that. But it says at the beginning of the page and at the bottom, Sirran wa alaniyatan. It's got, they're both praised, yani.
There is the hadith as well, when like the 7 to be shaded under the shade of Allah when there's no other shade. And then one of the categories is that the one who gives with his right hand and the left doesn't know, and does it in utmost secretness. The Diana Tafsir mentions that unless there is a specific reason to do it openly and publicly, it should the infaq should be done secretly, closed. Back in the days, I think they give the example of the zakat stones. I'm not too sure, Ustadh, if you've heard of this, but the Ottoman times, they would have stones where the rich people would come and drop, let's say, money, their zakat, and then the poor will come and take as much as they need from it. I always find it really beautiful, preserving the dignity of the poor people, and but yet still fulfilling the institution of zakat.
Sometimes we see these examples again, like Turkey, because we love Turkey. Many other countries, I'm sure, have these good spirits as well. But I'm sure it was there that I've seen, these signs saying, if you're needy, just take from here, like in front of a restaurant. Like, this is a fridge, especially for, like, if you need it, no questions asked, just take from here, right? And, then these things get shared on social media. And what that does is, like, imagine, like, that goes viral, right? And I want to use that in the positive sense. Now, this spreads then, and others just get an idea that I could do the same. And people will benefit from them, and the reward goes back to whoever did that first and whoever shared it as well. Because we may worry about the riyah and the showing off, but you needn't always get held back by that fear, right? Because there is good in spreading. We know that obviously social media, you get all sorts of things, and sometimes very performative and insincere things, perhaps. But if your action can encourage others, then it would fall under what the Prophet ﷺ has described as man sanna sunnatan hasana falahu ajruha wa ajru man amila biha ila yawm al-qiyamah. Right, so whoever establishes a good sunnah, right, not a bid'ah, no, but whoever does some practice that is in accordance with the deen, but starts something, a new initiative that gets people doing good, then he will have the reward of everyone who does so later, right? Without them losing anything of their reward, but you will have your share. So this is the encouragement sometimes in public events and so on. You're asked to put up your hand and say, I'm donating. You might not want to do it. You might just write it on a private pledge, but if that, inshallah, is better, increases your reward in most cases. But maybe sometimes the reward is greater by speaking up at that point. So people feel that, yes, they feel encouraged by the fact that people are stepping up. Someone needs to break the silence. And then they would have reward for those who follow.
Yeah. So verse 272, it mentions that the people they used to give the Sahaba, they used to give charity to their policies, relatives, and they would dislike it, but then they were allowed to give it to them when inquired about this matter. So this verse, it says that was revealed about that. I guess the verse says that it is not for you to guide them; it is God who guides them. But then there's the charity component to it. We know that famous with the Ifk incident as well. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu makes an oath not to give to a certain person. Mistah was it? I think.
Mistah,
Yeah. So but then the Quran says, "Will you not prefer that Allah forgives?"
Yeah.
And so He continues to give to that person as well. So I guess that's what Ibn Kathir covers with that verse.
Yeah, that makes it contextually.
Yeah, like, and then the hadith that I had mentioned was here as well.
Which
so
hadith?
The one who gives to an adulterer,
adulteress,
and thief and rich person, and mentions the Prophet says that his thing was accepted, his hadith was accepted.
Maybe when the lesson is don't try to just give for conversion, or for someone to receive hidayah. It's like a principle, maybe. I mean, there is the mu'allaf al-qulub, but generally just leave the results to Allah. You can't create hidayah in the hearts of people.
There's also the Hassan al-Basri mentions whenever the believer spends, including what he spends on himself, he seeks Allah's pleasure. That component of, I didn't think of this because when we think about spending, we always think about spending on others. But then there's this emphasis on spending on yourself and your household as well. So thinking of it from the perspective of spending this for the sake of Allah.
True.
I found that a nice perspective as well.
Yeah, because the word is mutlaq, وَلَا تُنْفِقُونَ إِلَّا ابْتِغَاءَ وَجْهِ اللَّهِ. That's gonna increase my spending.
Yeah. So in 272, like there's a couple of ways to understand laysa alayka hudahum. Either it's speaking to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as the translation here indicates. Given that there are different types of spenders and withholders who have been mentioned in the previous part, there are some who give with man and adha. There are some who the shaitan promises them poverty, so they don't do anything. So there's a reminder here of the general principle, and this applies to the unbelievers, to the hypocrites, and so on, that you can only convey to them, and you are not responsible for ultimately them being guided or not. There is a sabab nuzul attached to this also, which relates it to a different situation. So every believer is kind of being told, laysa alayka, you who are listening to this ayah, it's not upon you to guide people by kind of pushing them financially into Islam, because there were some of the Sahaba who wanted to spend upon family members and so on in order to encourage them into Islam. So in the end, if you do so, if you spend on them even with this intention, the benefit will come back to you, whether you have the effect that you desired or not.
Yeah.
Right? Because again, you can't change someone's hearts through cold hard cash. It could be that your kindness and your action makes them, draws them closer, and this can be related to what's mentioned in the masarif, for the things in which zakat is spent. One of the categories mentioned there in Surah At-Tawbah is وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةُ قُلُوبُهُم. So they would be people who are on the verge of coming to Islam, tribes, prominent individuals perhaps, who are being encouraged, or those who have newly embraced Islam, and you're spending on them in order to strengthen their relationship to the faith and the community.
Beautiful. Maybe just I guess 273 does mention the people, I guess in the context of this verse, mentions the people of Sufa who were either poor or they just didn't have the time to go out and do trade or work in the farms. But then at the same time, they were also careful as to how they would approach others too. That, as the verse says, the unknowing might think them rich because of their self-restraint. We know Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu would go and stop people like Umar radiallahu anh, sometimes Abu Bakr ask them about a verse, or just to get the conversation going so that they might take him home. And then the Prophet would sometimes take him home. He would faint at times from hunger, and people wouldn't understand why he fainted. But then we have him as the Sahabi who's narrated the most hadith within a matter of 3-4 years.
Yeah.
So yeah. There's a very nice hadith actually. One of the Sahabi, his mother tells him to go and to ask the Prophet for some financial aid. He goes, sits down next to him, and then the Prophet he says that Abu Saeed is narrating this hadith, and he says that whoever, like, he sits next to him, and then the Prophet he says, he faced me and said to me, whoever felt satisfied, then Allah will enrich him. Whoever is modest, Allah will make him decent. Whoever is content, then Allah will suffice for him. Whoever asks people while having a small amount, he will have begged the people. So Abu Sa'id, he says that, then I said to myself, I have a camel, I have al-Yaquta, I'm not too sure what that is, and indeed it is worth more than a small amount. And I went back without asking the Prophet ﷺ for anything. So, like the idea of having that sufficiency, the dignity, preserving that, and only asking if you're really in need, perhaps, and this this kind of discourages from doing otherwise.
Many scholars, people come to them, ask the questions. Even you've heard stories where the scholar answers the question exactly what the person has been thinking without them even asking it or uttering it. So if that happens to normal scholars, you definitely, that reading what the person's going, it will definitely happen to the prophets. Alayhi salatu wasalam.
They know what they came for.
Yeah, Allah opens some curtains for them.
Okay, inshallah.
يمكن نقف هنا.
Ustadh Sohaib.
Happy to wrap up today, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Let's try to follow with action. Thank you for Makiz Ansari, left a very nice comment for us, saying it's a beautiful discussion, especially enjoyable, the finer aspects on ethics and wisdom. May Allah be pleased. Ameen.
Inshallah.
It's coming from Medina, this comment. So inshallah. Okay, inshallah. Next week we'll cover the last 3 pages, and then we'll do the khatam of Surah Baqarah, inshallah.
Last 3?
Huh? Last.
Okay, mashallah.
I think 30th week now. Yeah, so inshallah.
We're back to Tuesday night. Yeah.
Tuesday night, yes, inshallah.
Bismillah.
Okay. No worries. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.